now come to order. Without objection, the chairman is authorized to declare recess at any time. Before I deliver my opening remarks, I wanted to note that today the committee is meeting virtually. I want to announce a couple of reminders to the members about the conduct of this hearing. First, members should keep their video feed on as long as they are present in the hearing. Members are responsible for their own microphones. Please also keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. Finally, if members have documents they wish to submit for the record, please email them to the committee clerk, whose email address was circulated prior to the hearing. Good morning, and thank you to all of our witnesses who are joining us virtually today to discuss the importance of clean hydrogen research. This is a timely topic, one that has quickly risen to the center of energy policymaking and debate. There is no doubt that hydrogen can play a valuable role in our national and global decarbonization efforts, but crucial questions and uncertainties remain, and our work on this committee can help resolve them. In setting the stage for this hearing, I would like to offer a few thoughts that I believe can help guide us, and I welcome further discussion with those who may disagree with some aspects of my perspective. Current hydrogen production methods are very carbon intensive and are responsible for 830 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year, the equivalent of the annual CO2 emissions of the United Kingdom and Indonesia combined. We must complement our excitement about hydrogen's potential with caution and care. In my view, when it is made from 100% renewable electricity using a process called electrolysis, what is known as green hydrogen has the potential to make a crucial but targeted contribution to meeting our climate goals. We can replace the polluting forms of hydrogen that are currently used in certain industrial processes. Green hydrogen could be one of the keys to decarbonizing difficult sectors like long-haul shipping, aviation, and steel production. And fuel cells powered by green hydrogen or other storage mechanisms could help stabilize and secure the grid as we scale up wind, solar, and geothermal. There is exciting and necessary research to conduct in the areas I have just described. And of course, federal R&D programs may demonstrate that additional applications make sense. Across the board, challenges in hydrogen storage, transportation, durability, costs, and safety must be addressed. We must also be cognizant of the fact that the fossil fuel industry is lobbying for a different vision of our hydrogen future, a much more expansive one. As our colleagues on the House Committee on Oversight and Reform have highlighted recently, this is an industry that uses its wealth to deceive the American people about the nature of the climate crisis and the solutions we need. That is a fact. And as scientists and public servants, we have a duty to subject their claims to intense scrutiny. We are in a climate emergency, and we do not have time to waste this decade. When hydrogen is made from fossil fuels, I do not believe that we should call it clean. In areas where there are established, safe, widely available, and cost-effective ways to eliminate carbon emissions, we should not be trying to clear an uncertain path for hydrogen with public funds. We will have to be strategic and prioritize. And since we already need to deploy much more wind and solar just to power the grid, we should avoid wasting hydrogen in applications like vehicles and appliances that can run on renewable electricity directly and more efficiently. In my state of New York, industry is trying to sell major expansions of fossil gas infrastructure by promising a future conversion to hydrogen. Thankfully, our new governor is not buying it. Utilities, meanwhile, which are already passing on outrageous costs to my constituents, want to use hydrogen to heat our homes. For people who struggle with energy poverty and injustice, that would raise costs even further. Efficiency and electrification using heat pumps would reduce those costs. As these examples show, questions of political economy cannot be artificially separated from our scientific research endeavors. There may be additional uses of hydrogen beyond what I have described that, in theory, can play a transitional role to a fully renewable future. But if we are going to safely explore those possibilities, surely we must also discuss the safeguards and planning capacities needed to actually ensure a transition, rather than simply leaving it to the market. We need to address the risk of locking in fossil fuel infrastructure and of creating dangerous new path dependencies. And we must evaluate the potential impacts of communities, not just at one point in the process, but all along the hydrogen supply chain. If designed and deployed correctly, hydrogen can contribute to the growth of good, clean energy jobs and help us limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It is incredibly important that we meet this moment properly. We cannot afford to miss the mark. I want to again thank our excellent panel of witnesses assembled today, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. With that, I now recognize Mr. Weber for an opening statement. I believe Mr. Weber is not here. The chair now recognizes Mr. Lucas to make an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Bowman. As ranking member of the Science Committee, I've long emphasized the importance of investing in American innovation to advance the next generation of clean energy, to export clean energy technologies, and to ensure that the long-term independence of the U.S. energy sector. This means taking an all-of-the-above approach that embraces a wide range of energy sources, like renewables, advanced nuclear, research into the cleaner and more efficient use of fossil fuels. Today, we have an opportunity to examine the status of hydrogen energy research in the United States, a key technology area that could leverage and strengthen many aspects of this diverse energy portfolio. In recent years, we've all seen the global push for hydrogen. Hydrogen energy technologies have the potential to diversify, exportable, abundant, and clean, and they hold great promise for the U.S. energy sector and its workforce. For example, in Oklahoma, it is projected that a hydrogen economy would add more than 6,000 jobs and provide economic benefits between $1.5 and $2.5 billion for the state. Oklahoma is home to diverse energy resources like natural gas, wind energy, extensive pipeline networks, carbon sequestration facilities, geothermal, and premier hydrogen end-use potential. We are well positioned to lead the way in advancing next-generation hydrogen energy technologies. But today, many challenges remain on the path to their commercial success, and we must address these through strategic investment in both public-private partnerships and fundamental research programs. On Tuesday, the Department of Energy announced two RFIs to inform how they can implement a $9.5 billion in hydrogen initiatives authorized by the infrastructure bill. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Weber. This is an unprecedented expansion. The Department of Energy has a huge task ahead of them. They need to do this right, both to effectively build out our hydrogen technologies and to meet our responsibilities to the American taxpayer. It's our job on the Science Committee to monitor and guide these kinds of investments. I look forward to continuing to work with my friends across the aisle on comprehensive DOE hydrogen research legislation that will provide necessary structure and long-term direction for this growth. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today and for outlining their vision to make affordable hydrogen energy a reality for the next generation. Thank you, Chairman Bowman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lucas. At this time, I would like to introduce our witnesses. Mr. Keith Whipkey is a laboratory program manager for the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Technologies program at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, where he worked since 1993. The program covers all aspects of hydrogen and fuel cells, from hydrogen production with renewables to end-use applications. Dr. Julio Friedman is chief scientist and head carbon wrangler at Carbon Direct. Prior to this role, he was a senior research scholar at the Center for Global Energy Policy at Columbia University, where he led the Carbon Management Research Initiative. He has held leadership roles at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and the Department of Energy. Ms. Rachel Fakhri is a senior advocate at National Resources Defense Council. She leads the Hydrogen and Energy Innovation Portfolio at NRDC and designs policy and regulatory frameworks to leverage the technology's potential to support decarbonization goals, excuse me, as well as internalize the guardrails necessary to mitigate its risk. She is also the green hydrogen sector lead for the UN High-Level Climate Champions, where she leads the organization's global strategy in this area. Dr. Tomas Diaz de la Rubia, is the Vice President for Research and Partnerships at the University of Oklahoma. Prior to this role, Dr. Diaz de la Rubia was the Chief Scientific Officer and Senior Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at Purdue University. He has also held senior roles at Deloitte Consulting and Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Sheldon Kimber is Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Intersect Power, a developer of utility-scale renewables. In his prior role as COO of Recurrent Energy, he led the company's development, engineering, procurement, construction, and operations activities globally. He also holds an MBA from UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, where he teaches project finance in the MBA program. Thank you all for joining us today. As our witnesses should know, you will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing. When you all have completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. We will start with Mr. Whipke.
Ranking Member Lucas, Chairman Bowman, Ranking Member Weber, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to discuss the state of hydrogen research and development in the United States. I'm Keith Whipke and have been in National Renewable Energy for 29 years and have led our fuel cell and hydrogen technologies program for almost a decade. I would like to highlight hydrogen's opportunities and research challenges, how the national labs are addressing these to benefit our country, and the continued research investments needed. Throughout the world, hydrogen is increasingly recognized as a critical central component for a clean, sustainable, efficient, and economic energy system. Hydrogen is remarkable for its ability to carry, store, and convert energy to connect sectors that are harder to electrify or decarbonize. Its chemical energy can be converted to products and fuels, used to generate electricity and heat, or stored to enable larger scale deployment and use of renewable electricity. The U.S. Department of Energy's H2 at Scale vision embodies the tremendous opportunities hydrogen presents for transforming our energy system. The major challenges for hydrogen relate to cost, scale, durability, and manufacturability. Widespread deployment of hydrogen will require cost reductions, as current large-scale clean production costs are $5 to $6 a kilogram or higher. DOE's Hydrogen Shot initiative seeks to reduce the cost by 80% to $1 per kilogram of hydrogen in a decade, which would unlock new markets for hydrogen, including steel manufacturing, clean ammonia, energy storage, and zero-emission heavy-duty trucks. The growth of electrolyzer deployments in the U.S. has been modest compared to the rapid scale-up elsewhere. By accelerating its activities and support for large deployment, the U.S. has an opportunity to lead the world in creating and domestically manufacturing technologies that provide cost-competitive clean hydrogen. This real-world experience will feed back into the R&D cycle and continue to drive costs down. Electrolyzer systems that produce hydrogen are commercially available today, but are fabricated at low volumes and not sufficiently affordable, durable, or efficient to be deployed at large scale in our grid. And for hydrogen-powered long-haul trucks with million-mile lifetimes, the industry needs efficient fuel cell systems that are 4 to 5 times more durable. DOE's hydrogen program is taking an all-hands-on-deck approach to achieve the Hydrogen Shot goal. The hydrogen community, especially our national laboratories, is pulling together to address worldwide challenges. The nation's crown jewels of research staff and experimental capabilities reside in our national lab system. Unique expertise and facilities developed to help commercialize fuel cell cars are now being leveraged to further develop hydrogen technologies. DOE's Hydrogen Fuel Cell Technologies Office, within the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, is advancing R&D through multi-lab consortia on hydrogen production, fuel cells, storage, and blending hydrogen with natural gas. The Office of Science's Basic Energy Sciences program supports fundamental research in electrochemistry, material science, and chemical science to improve our understanding and development of new hydrogen technologies. NREL, Idaho National Laboratory, and the National Energy Technology Laboratory are collaborating to conduct research and analysis on integrated energy systems incorporating renewable, nuclear, and fossil energy. And NREL has launched a major initiative with support from DOE called ARES, or Advanced Research on Integrated Energy Systems, to match the complexity of the modern energy system. Private sector partnerships are one of the most important pathways to reach our country's carbon reduction goals and maintain competitive advantage and innovation. Industry provides the market drivers and means to scale up laboratory innovations into domestic products and jobs. Significant national investments, like those we've seen recently, will accelerate development of hydrogen technologies and provide the opportunity for U.S. market leadership internationally. A combination of longer-term and higher-risk R&D with big payoffs, balanced with near-term demonstrations and deployments of existing technologies, will accelerate the market, provide feedback on remaining research challenges, and keep the innovation pipeline flowing. There are still key research opportunities to develop advanced hydrogen production techniques that can take advantage of renewable and nuclear power or use solar energy directly. And further development is needed to integrate hydrogen into new applications, such as making net zero CO2 chemicals and liquid fuels. Investments in hydrogen R&D will provide significant national security, economic, and environmental benefits to our country. National lab research is lowering the cost and increasing the scale of technologies to make, move, store, and use hydrogen across multiple energy sectors. NREL's vision supports leading an energy transition in which solutions are inclusively designed and benefits are equitably distributed. Clean hydrogen can be made anywhere there's clean electricity, enabling renewable power jobs for rural America while cleaning up the air in cities for those who often suffer from the worst air quality. We look forward to continued innovation and thank you for your support.
Thank you, Mr. Whipkey. Dr. Friedman is now recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Bowman, Ranking Member Weber, Ranking Member Lucas, and members of both the full and subcommittee. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. My name is Dr. Julio Friedman. I am the Chief Scientist at Carbon Direct, a science-based firm that works with partners to make carbon reductions and carbon removals real. It is an honor to appear before this committee to discuss the status of hydrogen technology, as well as key RD&D priorities and strategies for innovation and investment. You have my written testimony, which cites my work at Columbia University and others. I will focus on a subset in my oral testimony. In short, the world is coming on fast. The investment of major volumes of money, shifting policy landscapes everywhere from Japan to Europe to Chile are changing the way the world thinks about hydrogen and how it will be used today and in the future. The US can lead in innovation and in speed to market. That's our superpower. We have just passed legislation with unprecedented funding. That funding should be used with a deployment focus around innovation, not a discovery focus. We should include work on existing assets as well as assets yet to be built. We should focus on infrastructure and infrastructure design, planning, and finance, as well as core innovations. In short, there's lots of room to innovate, many ways to reduce cost, many ways to improve performance. I detailed these in my written testimony. A few brief words about supply side. If we're going to make hydrogen, it should be low carbon hydrogen. The focus should be on carbon emissions. It's not a question of blue, green, or bio. If you're tall enough to go on this ride, that means you have a very, very low life cycle carbon index that should include upstream emissions as well as produced emissions, as well as embodied emissions. We can have low or even sub-zero carbon intensities if we keep our eye on that goal. We should invest in novel processes, on a pure green hydrogen play, new membranes, membraneless technology, photocatalysis, microbial pathways, and more provide really great opportunities for more supply at lower cost. That, however, is not the only way to make super low carbon hydrogen. Waste biomass to hydrogen is born zero. Pyrolysis, gasifiers, other pathways can make it. If we focus carefully on that, again, we can make hydrogen with a sub-zero carbon footprint. Novel pathways like high temperature water cracking from high temperature nuclear cycles like sulfur iodine or methane pyrolysis also hold promise. Most people think just about the modules. I would encourage you to think at a slightly larger scale. Improved materials and efficiencies are great and important, but we should be thinking about the balance of systems cost, how to integrate with the grid, advances in manufacturing for hydrogen production as well. As important as supply is, the use is where the action is. We need way more focus in our industrial ecosystem and innovation on use of clean hydrogen, in particular in heavy industry and hard to abate sectors, steel, chemicals, cement, glass. Maybe we want to just throw hydrogen into a blast furnace. I kind of doubt it. We should be thinking more about how exactly we are going to use these things in existing assets and new ones. That includes something that Dr. Ripke mentioned, the creation of synthetic fuels, ammonia, circular methanol, advanced aviation fuels, and so forth, as well as applications in long duration storage. A few key topics in and around innovation deserve special attention. One of those is the risks of hydrogen leakage. Right now, hydrogen is monitored for safety. That's a couple of % per year of leakage risk. We need to do better than that. We should be looking at sub-fraction of a percent. We should be looking at something like 0.5% annual leakage or less. That is a way to ensure safety to communities as well as good climate outcomes. Second, we need to focus on human capital. There are just not enough human beings today in this arena, not to innovate, start companies, make patents, manufacture, or meet the rapidly growing demand. We will just need more. Finally, we should focus on setting standards for the production of clean hydrogen and clear definitions of what that should mean. Those definitions are or that the requirement to make those definitions is in IIJA. Hopefully, we will see the Department of Energy deliver those soon. There are good roles for many DOE offices and national labs, also for universities and companies, also for other government agencies, NSF, NIST, EPA, Department of Defense, Labor, Department of Transportation, and others. I look forward to taking your questions to dive into some of these details.
Thank you, Dr. Friedman. Ms. Fakhri is now recognized.
Thank you, Chair Bowman, Ranking Member Lucas, Ranking Member Weber, and members of the full and subcommittee. Thank you for having me here today. This is exactly the sort of informed deliberation we need at such a critical time in hydrogen's development. My name is Rachel Fakhri, and I lead the hydrogen work at the Natural Resources Defense Council. The targeted deployment of green hydrogen presents exciting opportunities for climate progress, public health, and quality jobs. The main question we should be addressing today is, how can we best steward taxpayers' dollars to advance hydrogen in the most efficient and beneficial way? I'll focus on 3 key points. First, green hydrogen technology offers a great opportunity to support our climate goals and propel the US to the forefront of the global clean energy innovation race. But we must be acutely sensitive to hydrogen's serious risks, which will require robust safeguards to avoid burdening Americans with high energy costs, damaging air pollution, and jeopardizing climate progress. Finally, parts of DOE's hydrogen program need re-examination. Congress can and should direct DOE to set new priorities to meet hydrogen's emerging challenges. To my first point, and as my fellow witnesses have stated, hydrogen can replace fossil fuels in sectors of the economy with few other clean alternatives, including maritime shipping, aviation, and steelmaking. Therefore, green hydrogen can play a key role in helping us achieve a net zero greenhouse gas global economy by 2050. DOE is uniquely positioned to lead in driving technology forward at a critical point in our fight against the climate crisis. However, it is also vitally important that we recognize that hydrogen technology has serious risks that require safeguards and caution. Hydrogen must be used sparingly because its production and use are energy intensive. For example, it could require up to 5 times more electricity to heat a home with hydrogen than an efficient heat pump. This means that hydrogen is largely an ill-advised and costly solution outside of those challenging sectors with limited alternatives. Shoehorning hydrogen into sectors with more affordable clean energy alternatives risks saddling Americans with costly solutions and complicating the task of decarbonizing our economy. Hydrogen production requires rigorous safeguards to ensure it's actually clean, as Dr. Friedman said. Even emerging production pathways touted as clean may emit dangerous amounts of greenhouse gases. It is critical that all federal funding be exclusively allocated to hydrogen projects that can verifiably demonstrate very low carbon intensities and no harmful pollution impacts. But we already know that zero emissions green hydrogen has the most potential for cost reductions and is the resource most strictly aligned with US long-term goals for protecting our climate and the health of our communities. We also need more research on the climate and public health impacts of hydrogen transport, storage, and use, as Dr. Friedman alluded to. And until we better understand those, we should approach hydrogen investments with caution. For example, when burned, hydrogen can produce worse air pollution than methane gas. This brings me to my final point. DOE's portfolio has delivered commendable successes, but hydrogen's role in the economy is significantly shifting, and it's time for Congress to direct DOE to set new priorities to advance the technology in a no-regrets manner. We have three primary recommendations. One, recognizing that there has been incredible advancement in clean energy solutions like renewable energy and electrification, DOE must better tease out hydrogen's unique role in pathways to net zero by 2050. This should be the very bedrock for making hydrogen investments and would foster optimal stewardship of taxpayer money. Two, DOE's work should only prioritize the advancement of green hydrogen in those hard to electrify sectors. DOE should also phase down work on hydrogen applications that can be served by more affordable clean alternatives, such as buildings and passenger cars. This strategic focus is necessary given the short time window to 2050. It would also propel the US to the forefront of clean energy innovation, bolster our competitive edge globally, and support US ambitions to become a hydrogen exporter. And finally, DOE should investigate the climate impact of hydrogen leakage across its value chain and air pollution impacts of hydrogen use, and develop necessary solutions to mitigate them. Thank you, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fakhri. Dr. Diaz de la Rubia, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Subcommittee Chairman Bowman, Ranking Member Lucas, Subcommittee Ranking Member Weber, and other members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I am Tomas Diaz de la Rubia, Vice President for Research and Partnerships at the University of Oklahoma. As Chairman Bowman mentioned, prior to this position, I spent the first part of my career at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, one of the DOE's 17 national laboratories, serving in various roles, including as Deputy Director for Science and Technology and Chief Research Offices. These experiences, I believe, have given me important insights on public-private partnerships, innovation, and workforce development that are relevant to today's topic, the future of hydrogen to advance clean energy and climate goals. Cost remains a major obstacle for advancing economically viable clean hydrogen. On June 7th, 2021, DOE announced an ambitious goal through its Hydrogen Earthshot to reduce the cost of hydrogen by 80% to $1 a kilogram in just 10 years. At present, clean hydrogen produced using renewables, for example, costs about 5 times the DOE goal. The Bipartisan American Investment and Jobs Act, passed by Congress in November of 2021, has made a significant investment in hydrogen. Investments such as these are critical and essential. However, they alone are not sufficient to meet DOE's cost goals and overcome significant barriers to clean hydrogen development and deployment. Scientific breakthroughs are still needed to advance hydrogen technologies that do not emit carbon dioxide and are carbon neutral. A focused and dedicated DOE Office of Science-supported fundamental research program could accelerate innovation and directly support planned DOE applied research, demonstration, and deployment activities. I recommend the creation of a hydrogen and fuel cell innovation center modeled after the DOE's energy innovation hubs. This center could be modeled after those hubs, such as those in energy storage, solar fuels, desalination, and nuclear reactor modeling. Several key attributes that have made those centers successful include tackling a specific energy grant challenge over a period of 5 to 10 years, clear measurable metrics, assembling multidisciplinary, multi-institutional teams from DOE national labs, research universities, and the private sector, and addressing the science, engineering, and technology challenges simultaneously. While a dedicated fundamental research program would address scientific challenges and develop the future of the clean hydrogen workforce, the proposed center would also be, importantly, a bridge between new discoveries and the clean energy demonstration hubs proposed in the infrastructure bill. This is a gap that must be filled. Regional diversity and strong public-private partnerships are also essential for the successful and sustained deployment of clean hydrogen technologies. In early 2021, Governor, State, and the state legislature created the Hydrogen Production, Transportation, and Infrastructure Task Force in Oklahoma, and I had the privilege of serving as co-chair of the subcommittee on hydrogen production. The task force delivered a comprehensive report to the governor that was published in December of 2021. And in this report, the task force found that Oklahoma, as Ranking Member Lucas mentioned earlier, has inherent advantages that position it as a future regional leader in the hydrogen economy. Oklahoma ranks fifth in the nation in natural gas production and is the nation's third largest producer of renewable electricity from wind. In addition, Oklahoma, along with its regional partners, has extensive natural gas and hydrogen pipeline infrastructure, a highly skilled oil, gas, and renewable energy workforce, low-cost electricity, access to abundant water sources, abundant CO2 and hydrogen-ready geologic pore space, and many, many companies already engaged in the hydrogen economy supply chain, including, importantly, its end use. In conclusion, states like Oklahoma and our regional partners are well positioned to advance a clean energy hydrogen economy. I want to thank the members of the committee for advancing new federal opportunities in hydrogen in the American Infrastructure and Jobs Act, such as the hydrogen hubs and related research and development activities. In Oklahoma, we are bringing together a broad regional coalition of stakeholders from state and local governments, academia, national laboratories, tribal nations, nonprofits, and local communities. As the committee looks for additional opportunities to help advance the hydrogen economy, I recommend legislation that establishes a dedicated, use-inspired, fundamental research program to advance carbon-neutral hydrogen through a hydrogen and fuel cell innovation center that would tackle the hardest science and technology challenges and coordinate activities across the innovation spectrum. Thank you for your strong support and interest in this critical energy topic.
Thank you, Dr. Diaz de la Rubia, for your comments. Mr. Kimber, you are now recognized.
Thank you. I want to thank the chairman, the ranking member, and the committee for the invitation to appear today. This committee's focus on clean hydrogen is both appropriate and timely, as the historic affordability and availability of clean power is beginning to unlock hydrogen's long-awaited potential. This is an enormous opportunity for our nation, but we need the help of government to capture it. Clean hydrogen is a game-changing technology that will reduce the cost and increase the pace of our transition to a decarbonized economy. Converting to electric power sources from combustion sources is a critical step, but electrification alone will not decarbonize many heavy-duty, carbon-intensive sectors of the economy. This is why clean hydrogen is so critical. Clean hydrogen also empowers local economies that depend on today's fossil fuel industry to benefit from the expanding energy transition. Several rural areas of the United States hold enormous potential for clean hydrogen, particularly Texas and Oklahoma, which seems to be getting quite a bit of attention in this hearing. These states have abundant wind and solar generation potential, a vast network of pipeline infrastructure, and a qualified workforce. I believe that they are poised to become the Permian Basin of clean hydrogen. But part of their ability to do so will be driven by cost. The DOE's Hydrogen Earthshot initiative is focused on low-cost clean hydrogen in the next decade. And I applaud the establishment of the electrolysis program included in the infrastructure bill. But in addition to electrolyzer technology advances, the key to cost reduction will really be the rapid deployment at massive scale. In fact, it is the rapid scaling of the solar industry, particularly the cost-effective, abundant clean power that it provides, that is unlocking the long-awaited potential of clean hydrogen itself. We've seen this with wind, we have seen this with solar, and we've seen this with batteries. And electrolyzer technology can and should be next. The research investments of the past have already given us many of the tools we need to build a clean hydrogen economy. I believe what is missing now are the first large-scale deployments of already existing technologies. These initial large projects will drive down costs as manufacturing scales up. As one of the leading American developers of clean energy resources, my company is in conversations with natural gas pipelines, local distribution companies, and end users, and they all want lower carbon fuels in the pipes. Demand for carbon emissions reductions through voluntary corporate commitments sets up a unique opportunity for DOE to connect demand with deployment. DOE can help put hydrogen in these pipelines through large-scale projects backed by grant funding and regulatory coordination. This targeted approach can begin to build the bridge between clean energy and an incumbent fossil fuel industry. In my view, deployment should be accelerated by DOE in three specific ways. First, this emerging industry needs clear and defensible carbon accounting guidance. With this in place, the right market signals will exist to offer voluntary markets new options to decarbonize. This approach should consider the carbon impact of the full fuel life cycle, including on-site emissions from hydrogen generation, as well as upstream feedstock production. Second, we must ensure that DOE's hydrogen hubs encourage large-scale hydrogen production focused on industrial processes or pipelines, and not focus purely on transportation. Decarbonizing today's consumers of fossil fuel-based hydrogen, primarily in refining and ammonia production, is one of the best use cases for green hydrogen as a decarbonization lever. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, blending clean hydrogen into the natural gas pipeline system will leverage the billions of dollars in private capital that have already been invested there. This must start by rapidly testing and validating the safety of hydrogen blending into existing pipes. This work will be critical to providing the regulatory certainty for pipeline companies and asset developers alike to deploy private capital. In conclusion, DOE, with the backing of Congress, holds several keys to unlocking clean hydrogen's potential. Clean hydrogen is an opportunity for the United States to leverage its renewable resources and its conventional energy expertise into a leadership position in the energy transition. We cannot afford to cede this opportunity to other countries, as we have in other clean energy technologies. The world will decarbonize with or without the United States government. But what stands before us is the opportunity to lead as we have in the past. It is this leadership that has ensured our position in the world through prior transitions, and continued leadership is required to maintain that position. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before the committee. I'm happy to answer questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kimber. At this point, we will begin our first round of questions. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Fakhri, thank you for your testimony. One of your recommendations was that DOE take a more holistic approach to its hydrogen R&D portfolio by tackling it in connection to other solutions and to our overall climate goals. Can you elaborate on what that might look like? And should DOE be thinking about applying this approach in other arenas as well?
Thank you, Chair. We have a short time window to 2050 to decarbonize our economy and achieve our net zero greenhouse gas emission goals. And we still have quite a few clean energy solutions to develop. So we need to be very strategic in how we spend our RD&D dollars over the next 10 years, 20 years. And we need to focus on those solutions that are most likely going to play a major role in helping us achieve our goals and securing an affordable and reliable transition. And in order to do that, the DOE has to chart holistic pathways that get us to our goals of net zero efficiently, encompassing all technologies, both existing and under RD&D, and tease out RD&D priorities on this basis. And this very much applies to hydrogen. The DOE has to do a better job at teasing out its unique role relative to other solutions and establish goals. Currently, the department has a tendency to look at hydrogen in a more insular fashion. However, the good thing is this is changing. We are seeing great initiatives by the Hydrogen and Fuel Science Technologies Office, and we should encourage that. And absolutely, Chair Bowman, the DOE has to adopt this approach across its portfolio. We would like to see the Office of Policy work better with the technology offices in setting RD&D priorities, better collaboration across technology offices, considering the need to carve out unique roles. And Congress should not only encourage such a collaboration, but also provide dedicated funding and encourage the establishment of metrics and milestones to ensure tangible progress.
Thank you very much. Mr. Whipke, electrolysis is currently the key process for producing hydrogen from 100% renewable energy. The current cost of hydrogen production using this method is about $5 per kilogram of hydrogen. This past summer, DOE launched the Hydrogen Shot, seeking to reduce this cost by 80% to $1 per kilogram within a decade. What is needed to reduce the cost of electrolysis in line with this goal?
So a number of things, and thank you for the question. First of all, today's electrolyzers have been made for high efficiency because they're using expensive electricity. And so they have more expensive materials, they're operating 24/7. So one of the things that's going to change and is changing is renewable power is coming down in cost. And that means you can more opportunistically use the electrolyzer, but that's also maybe a different type of electrolyzer in terms of materials. They won't be operating as much. Efficiency maybe not as important, when you're turning it on and off and kind of just capturing these extra puffs of wind and rays of sunlight when they're available and extremely cheap. So the materials are evolving and may be different. So we're working on a number of things in catalysts, membranes, porous transport layers that essentially allow this newer use of electrolyzers to be more cost effective and durable.
Would anyone else like to briefly comment on this? We only have a couple seconds left. Mr.
Yes.
Friedman, Dr. Friedman, excuse me.
Thank you. Two quick things. First, the best costs in the United States are on the order of $5. Average costs are actually much higher because you need firm, reliable electricity to get the job done. Getting that at an industrial contract with clean electricity is closer to $9 a kilogram in most parts of the country. I will say that in some parts of the country, like Oklahoma, that is not the case. You have cheap, abundant, clean electricity there, and it's much cheaper locally. So be clear that the price is not $5 in the United States. The price is much higher in many jurisdictions. The other thing that I'll say is that, like Mr. Whipke said, you have to have high capacity factors for these things today. 55% of the cost is the electricity cost, but 30% of the cost is the electrolyzer cost. We may be able to make low cost electrolyzers. That would be great. But if not, the electrolyzer cost means you have to use these things a lot. Otherwise, you're wasting money.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Mr. Weber for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for indulging me. I lost our power last night. My cell phone lost its charge, and so we were a little behind the 8 ball this morning. What do we do without cell phones? Maybe if we could get cell phones more efficient with hydrogen, that would help us all. What do you think? But in this discussion, one of the things that I actually had looked at was the fact that hydrogen R&D should be a crossing-cutting initiative at DOE. I think we kind of all take that for granted. One that leverages the expertise of all applied energy offices. DOE currently supports 4 hydrogen demonstration projects that will take place at commercial nuclear power plants. One of the hydrogen hubs we've been talking about will be required to use nuclear power. Obviously, the benefits of using nuclear to produce hydrogen are multi-faceted, but let's just say several of them. It's clear. It's safe, that are clear is it's safe, it's reliable, and it is a clean power source. With that as a backdrop, my question is, Mr. Whipke, we'll start with you. In your opinion, are advanced nuclear technologies like those supported through DOE's Office of Nuclear Energy in a position, good position, I might add, to help overcome some of the R&D challenges associated with scalable hydrogen production?
Thank you for the question. And first of all, I'm not a nuclear power expert. I'm more on the renewable power. However, we work very closely with the Idaho National Laboratory and their ties with NE, and they have all the expertise in that area. I do believe, however, that we need to take an all the above approach, and nuclear is an outstanding baseload zero carbon source for making hydrogen. And there's actually research being done on high temperature electrolysis. And Idaho and others are leading in that area, where you essentially get to use not only electricity, but also the heat. And by elevating the temperature of that reaction, the amount of electricity is greatly reduced. So there's a lot of synergies by making hydrogen from nuclear that I think we really need to take advantage of.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Freeman, your thoughts?
Nuclear has the advantage of being firm, low carbon electricity, period. Firm, low carbon electricity is a real asset in this arena. It is particularly valuable from the existing fleet. We have a lot of nuclear plants that are being curtailed at the level of 15 to 20% per year. Those electrons could be used today to make zero carbon hydrogen. And if we can actually get novel reactors to have lower cost, then in point of fact, they could be very competitive for making low carbon clean ammonia and hydrogen.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're a proponent of nuclear. We could have a discussion, notwithstanding Mr. Whipke's comment that he's just an expert in renewables. We would argue that, in fact, nuclear is indeed a renewable. Mr. Whipke, let me come back to you. How is NREL coordinating with other national labs, like Idaho National Laboratory, for example, to carry out this kind of cross-cutting work?
Yeah, so one of the major ways NREL and other labs are collaborating is through various DOE consortia. So there is one called H2New, which is focused on advanced water splitting, and that includes the high temperature that we talked about, as well as low temperature for PEM and alkaline. But there's also another one called Hydrogen, which is basically longer term research, and it includes things like solar thermal chemical hydrogen production and photoelectrochemical water splitting, where you directly shine sunlight on an advanced solar cell immersed in liquid, and you make hydrogen and oxygen. So these are, I think it's really important to have a portfolio and have a good spectrum from low technology readiness level to more applied. Otherwise, when you deploy everything you have, the pipe ends up coming up dry. So you've got to keep that pipeline full of innovation.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I think I made myself clear. It's worth repeating. I strongly believe that in order for U.S. hydrogen economy to be competitive, we have to support R&D and hydrogen production from a range of clean energy sources, keeping all the pathways on the table. Furthermore, I was pleasantly surprised to hear Mr. Kimber say that the pipeline system that we already have in place should be a usable facility. It brings to mind for me the old chicken and the egg question. Do we want, I guess maybe it's a parallel path. We want to make sure that pipelines can handle that kind of product while we're doing the research on the product. So we're going to need a little buy-in from some folks across the country who aren't necessarily thrilled about pipelines, but it's worth it. And our trek to, as Miss, is it Factory? As she said, our trek to clean by 2050. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my final second.
Ms. Bonamici is recognized.
Thank you so much to Chair Bowman and ranking members Weber and Lucas for this hearing. But thank you to the witnesses for your testimony, for bringing your expertise to this conversation. Many advocates of blue hydrogen, including the fossil fuel industry, argue that generating hydrogen through steam methane reforming with carbon capture is low emitting and clean. A recent report from researchers at Stanford and Cornell universities examined blue hydrogen in heating and found that greenhouse gas emissions from burning blue hydrogen is 60% higher than burning diesel for heat. So, Ms. Fackery, will you please outline the costs and consequences both in public health and to our climate associated with the possible expansion of blue hydrogen generation and combustion? What would that mean?
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici. The study you mentioned, the Harvard Cornell study, demonstrates that absent regulations around the production of blue hydrogen, we could end up in a worse place than fossil fuels. And that is a chilling finding, and absolutely underscored the critical need of a very stringent and ambitious production standard around all forms of hydrogen, in particular blue hydrogen, considering the potential for upstream methane leakage, which, as we all know, is a big challenge. We should absolutely do better at measuring it and mitigating it, but there remains uncertainties around the extent to which we can do that and the time frame for doing that. So a massive or large-scale investment in blue hydrogen today would extend the present challenge of methane leakage that we don't have a solution for just yet. In addition to that, we cannot forget the public health impacts associated with gas extraction and use, which render blue hydrogen a resource that inherently poses more public health risks than a cleaner resource like green hydrogen. And considering the overburdened communities we have across the country and they're deserving of clean air, we have to be very careful with how we approach this resource.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. And we know green hydrogen has the potential to support decarbonization in heavy industry. And we've talked about this morning, long distance, aviation, heavy duty transportation, but it also presents efficiency, transportation, and cost challenges. So I'm encouraged by the ongoing research, design, and development at DOE to overcome these barriers. I was also excited to see research last year from Oregon State University in my home state that demonstrated that green hydrogen could be produced more efficiently and less expensively with different catalysts. So Mr. Whipkey, thank you for your work at NREL. What R&D challenges must be overcome for green hydrogen to account for significantly more than 1% of the total U.S. hydrogen production?
Thank you. So really the primary challenge here is cost and then scale. And so, the hydrogen shot goal is focused on that, driving down the cost rapidly, and not only through research, which is important, but also through deployment. I mean, we found again and again and again, we do not know what we don't know. And until you actually try doing something at a meaningful scale, you don't know what isn't going to work right. And part of it is actually the integration with the other parts of the energy system. It's one thing to have an electrolyzer you turn on and it runs for years. It's a completely different thing to put it into a system where you've got wind and solar coming up and down, you've got prices spiking up and down, you have weather-related activities going on where you might want to back off and provide more power. So it's, definitely driving down the cost is the first thing, but then that integration is incredibly important. That's why we're focused on a lot of systems integration at our Flatirons campus and ESIF through the Advanced Research for Energy, Integrated Energy Systems, ARES.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And I don't have another question. I just want to, before I yield back, thank you, Dr. Friedman, for mentioning the workforce issues and the need for human capital to help solve some of these problems. As a member of the Education and Labor Committee, it's something that I'm very much aware of, as well as being a member of this committee, that we absolutely need to both expand and diversify the workforce. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back my remaining seconds.
Ranking Member Lucas is recognized.
Thank you. Dr. De La Rubia, you describe a number of Oklahoma's diverse resources and structural advantages that uniquely position the state to be a future leader in clean energy economy. Oklahoma has already proven itself to be a major net exporter of energy and a national leader in producing natural gas and wind energy. So should it come as no surprise when I say we're a state that's used to delivering success to the U.S. energy sector? So, in your opinion, Doc, how will this kind of experience translate into continued success in delivering clean hydrogen? When it comes to long-term adoption of hydrogen energy technologies, how valuable is the regional cooperation at the state level?
Thank you, Representative Lucas. Yes, as you mentioned, the state of Oklahoma has assets across the entire life cycle of the hydrogen economy, from production capabilities to end-use industries. And when put together with our regional partners in this part of the country, clearly the combination of private sector companies, research universities, and state and local communities, tribal nations, as I mentioned in my remarks, bring together, the entire set of assets necessary to create a thriving hydrogen economy in the United States. I think regional partnerships are critical to success, because hydrogen ultimately, to be successful, to be a market adopted technology, needs to be spread throughout the nation. And so we need to work regionally and bring complementary assets to the table. I think it's absolutely critical, and we're well positioned to help do that and to help grow this economy in the U.S.
Continuing with you, Doctor, I'm also glad you mentioned the need for Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Innovation Center, as well as a dedicated DOE Office of Science-Supported Fundamental Research Program. Support for DOE basic research and research infrastructure is a top priority for the Science Committee in this Congress. In order to ensure that we're taking full advantage of DOE's research capacities, what steps can we take to improve partnerships between research universities like OU and the DOE national laboratories?
Thank you for that question. Having spent the bulk of my career at a DOE national laboratory, particularly as a chief research officer responsible for university partnerships and research at the laboratory, I have some fairly strong views on this. I think that, when we're talking about the hydrogen economy in particular, workforce development, as has been mentioned now several times, is absolutely critical. Workforce development is going to happen through our nation's research universities. A partnership between the research universities and the national laboratories is absolutely critical, a strong partnership. I think there are a lot of success stories between the DOE, national laboratories, and universities, but I think there's also a lot more that could be done. As an example, Sandia National Laboratory a few years ago established a cooperative agreement with a strategic series of universities across the country, in which they invested their own internal laboratory-directed research and development funds, which are authorized by Congress at every national lab to partner with universities and to fund research directly at universities. Okay. That mechanism could be exploited a lot more strongly to create these kinds of partnerships. I will also say that it would be my recommendation that as the Department of Energy recompetes national laboratory management and operating contracts, these are very large contracts across all the 17 national laboratories. Those are recompeted. I would recommend that we broaden the range of universities that are involved in the management and operating contracts, that we move away from single university or two university contracts to multi-regional universities that really embrace the entire diversity of the nation, including universities in EBSCOR states and other parts in the center of the country and not only in the coasts. I think that will go a long way towards enhancing the participation of the U.S. research universities in the national laboratory enterprise and allowing the laboratories to leverage the workforce development efforts happening at the universities.
Thank you very much, Doctor. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Stevens is recognized.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to our incredible chair of this phenomenal committee and to all of our witnesses. Clean hydrogen. We've got a company in southeastern Michigan in my district. It's located in Novi called Noble Gas Systems. They're a startup. They're in this space of, kicking off in 2017. They've got some prototypes. They're working on a handful of transportation specialties as it relates to hydrogen. And we've been talking a lot about these public-private partnerships, particularly in the research front. And I know that's what we're here to talk about, R&D. But I was just wondering, particularly from our panel, about ways in which the R&D leads to, sometimes we call it technology transfer, but support for small businesses, particularly like Noble Gas Systems in Michigan. Go ahead, Dr. Friedman.
Thank you so much. A couple of quick things. For starters, as I believe you know, the Department of Energy has small business grants, SBIRs, which actually help new companies get new technologies to market. I am confident that there will be SBIR money coming out of the hydrogen Earthshot that is relevant. For a company like Noble Gas that makes gas storage systems, hydrogen storage is a really important topic. I can imagine ways in which a company like that could in fact partner into the solicitations around the hubs, for example. They could also be sort of a pick and shovel company for a lot of projects that are going forward around the country that would benefit, say, from the Build Back Better provisions around the hydrogen production tax credit. That would create a lot of business for a company like Noble Gas.
Yeah, and Dr. Friedman, so the recognition of your title, Chief Carbon Wrangler, by the way, and it's great to have you back at the Science Committee. We're very appreciative of all of your input. And in your testimony, you were talking about, the $8 billion for a set of dedicated hydrogen hubs. This was in our Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so maybe you could dig at that a little bit more for us too, because we're really proud that not only did we vote and pass this legislation, but it got signed into law, and it's going to have some incredible ramifications for the U.S. economy.
It's historic legislation, and it will position the country well. It's not sufficient for everything, but it's a great opening ante. It has the deployment focus that I talked about. Hubs are where the action is. You have to build infrastructure. You have to create new supplies. You have to do it in communities, so you have to engage the communities in a way that is just and fair. And it creates wealth, it creates jobs, it creates growth. It is also a place where you can anchor innovation of all kinds. It is a place that you can anchor human capital development of all kinds. I know that the Department of Energy is taking a comprehensive view of these things. Secretary Granholm, Acting Assistant Secretary Wilcox are doing a terrific job thinking through these things. The request for information that just came out will advise that process in a way that can help all members and all stakeholders in these communities.
That's great to highlight in this hearing, by the way. So for all the folks watching back home, and RFI is out, and we've got Whipke and Kimber who wanted to chime in too, and we want to get you guys in because I'm interested to hear. Kimber, did you want to start?
Yeah. So we've got a partnership with a company called Electric Hydrogen, which is very similar to the one you're talking about. They're not based in your territory in your state, obviously, but
we'd love to have you.
But, they're looking for manufacturing. They're actually right now.
Yeah, good. Come to Michigan.
We're very focused on job creation. But I think that the key there is that, private industry is set up to do what needs to happen here, right? I mean, we've talked a lot about government R&D, a lot about the DOE. I think that there are folks like Breakthrough Capital, which is that Gates-backed fund. We've now got these sort of $1 billion, call it, Valley of Death, or, they fill in what used to be called the Valley of Death kind of venture funds, right? We need to create deployment pull-through, right? We need to do things like potentially the hydrogen tax credit. We need to make sure that we can, not vilify the pipeline companies and get this stuff blended into pipes safely. If we can do those things, you'll see companies like ours, going into construction in 2026, 2027 on multi-hundred megawatt, half a gigawatts type electrolyzer facilities in the middle of the country in places like Oklahoma. When you get that going, that's when you pull through demand for the product, right? And there's no lack of capital. You've got the R&D tech that's already established in companies like what you're talking about. You've got the breakthrough capital type money that's very high dollar venture. If they had an order from a company like mine for $1 billion worth of electrolyzers, we'd be off and running, right?
Yeah.
And so we really have to focus on how do we get this stuff deployed at scale, not in toys for transportation or other small scale projects.
Well, I have a bill, Mr. Chairman, and this is just as we wrap up on the investment in venture capital resources vis-a-vis the Department of Commerce, particularly for minority-owned businesses. So as we talk about access to those investments, we want to make sure we're building on equity and inclusion as well. So thank you, and I yield back. We'll keep this going.
Mr. Garcia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our panelists. Very interesting discussions. I want to just touch on sort of the production side of the discussion. We have the estimates from a cost perspective, anywhere from, $5 per kilogram all the way up to the higher end. Sounds like the average may be around $9, but from a production perspective, what is the either estimated or realized carbon footprint of a kilogram of hydrogen production? And I'll defer to, I think, Dr. Whipke first, and we can go around the horn if others have different estimates.
Yeah, so Argonne National Laboratory has a model called GREET, where they look at the full life cycle emissions of hydrogen production. And I believe from natural gas, it's maybe 8 or 9 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen. The clean hydrogen standard that's been put forward is to say that it will be lower than 2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen. So I think, it's really important. We can talk about colors of the rainbow, but at the end of the day, it's objectively measuring the actual carbon emissions, not just from the source of the hydrogen production, but all the way upstream. And I agree that, we need to fix and get a handle on the methane leakage, not only for making hydrogen, but for all the other things we do with natural gas as well, from heating to industrial heat, power production. That's not an issue just reserved for hydrogen.
Would anyone else like to discuss that estimate or differ with it at all?
If I may just mention real quickly, the NASA is in the process of launching a new mission to geostationary orbit called GeoCarb that will hopefully be launched in 2024. This very, very important mission is focused on measuring greenhouse gas emissions across the Americas daily with 5-kilometer resolution. When that satellite with this infrared sensor is up in orbit above the Earth, it will be able to give us very accurate fluxes on the surface from the measurements made from space on CO2, on oxygen, on methane, on solar reflected radiation. And so I just wanted to mention that because I believe it's going to be a critical component as we go forward of how to guarantee low emissions from these processes. And as it was just said, not only for hydrogen, but for all other emissions.
If I may add to this.
Freeman, go ahead. Yes, sir.
Sorry, if I may add to this discussion, there's a huge scholarship on the carbon footprint of hydrogen production. So what I'm about to say is well demonstrated. As Dr. Whipke said, if you're making it from steam methane reforming, it's about 8 or 9 kilograms per kilogram of hydrogen. If you do 95% capture with an autothermal reformer, that would be about 1 kilogram per kilogram. So you can get very low. That requires very low upstream emissions. The study that Representative Bonamici mentioned assumes 3.5% leakage. That is unreasonable. US average is 2%, best in class is 0.2%. But if you want the low carbon footprints, you really need that low emissions. You need 0.2% leakage upstream if you want to have a low carbon footprint for fossil, but it can be very low. For electricity, the footprint matters too. If you use 100% renewable electricity, the footprint of hydrogen is effectively 0. If the full life cycle may be, again, 1 kilogram per kilogram of CO2. However, if you have renewable power firmed by the grid, it will emit 10 kilograms, 10 times more, worse than steam methane reforming on its own. You must have very low carbon inputs of the electricity. 100% renewables or things like hydro and nuclear can do the job. Again, biomass, if you're using waste biomass, agricultural waste, municipal solid waste, effectively near 0 at the beginning. If you add carbon capture to that, you can get -14.
That's where the sub-zero net comes into.
That's the sub-zero part, exactly. Okay. And there's companies in the United States and California and Louisiana developing projects that look like that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. And I see Dr. Fakhri and Mr. Kimber. Doctor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Quick comment. I echo much of what Dr. Friedman just said, but I would urge the committee to not only think about carbon intensity, which is absolutely critical since we're trying to decarbonize our economy, but also impacts on public health and compatibility with long-term goals. Yes, we can achieve low levels with blue hydrogen of carbon intensity with very strict regulations, but it will never be 0. And we need to get to a net zero economy. So we need to look at the most compatible resources with this net zero goal, and green hydrogen offers a better value proposition there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kimber, we'll have to come back to you if you have a second round. I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. McNerney is recognized.
I thank the chairman. I thank the witnesses. A very informative hearing this morning. One of the things that Mr. Garcia raised was the carbon intensity, and the target is 2 kilograms of CO2 per equivalent kilogram of hydrogen. Mr. Whipke, is 2 kilograms equivalent? Is that an adequate threshold for carbon production, or should we try for better?
Well, so I think, ultimately at the end of the day, driving towards 0 or negative is what we're trying to do, what we want to do. And I go back to what happened in California in the 90s, where they came out with zero emission vehicle regulations, and 0 was the gold standard. And then they realized that it was really hard, especially at that time with expensive batteries that didn't last very long, didn't give you the range, to get people to buy the cars. And so they weren't having enough of a market impact. So you started looking at hybrid vehicles, partial zero emission vehicles, and they started putting out a portfolio of standards that drove toward that goal. And now we do have zero emission vehicles that are market viable, that people are buying in droves. But to jump there right away and say that's the only option, that's the gold standard, we'll do nothing else, I think really loses a market share potential.
So the new research has shown that the stream methane reforming, which is used to create blue and the gray hydrogen, has higher emissions than previously thought. Mr. Whipke, what kind of verification process should we be using to ensure that the technologies qualify for the new standards?
So I'm not an expert in that area, and I think Julio, Dr. Friedman covered that quite well. But I think there is government oversight and regulation for other industries, and I think this just needs to be tightened up to the point, we did this for ozone. We've conquered many other technical problems, and I don't see that this is something we can't handle.
Thank you. Dr. Friedman, thank you for coming to us from Livermore, across the hills, down the street. In your testimony, you discussed how more effort should be directed toward innovation on the end use of hydrogen across the sectors rather than supply side technologies. What are the particular sectors that are good candidates for hydrogen utilization that have fallen behind?
Heavy industry is the top of my list for that. Steel has been mentioned many times and remains a great place to do this. We know that we can make steel today from zero carbon hydrogen. The Swedes are doing it at a project called Hybrid. It's worth saying that they have super cheap clean electricity, which allows them to do this at almost competitive rates. Beyond that, though, the chemical industry is the next best bet. We could reduce the footprint of the chemical industry about 50% by using clean hydrogen, both from feedstocks and from heating. Low carbon heat is incredibly important. Right now, we burn rocks to melt rocks. If your industrial process starts by melting a rock, you're going to use a lot of heat. Hydrogen can provide that. So that includes things like cement making. We probably can't put hydrogen directly into cement, but we can probably put ammonia or other zero carbon fuels into cement to run the kiln. That in itself, 37% of global emissions come from making stuff. That's the biggest target. After that, shipping, long haul trucks, and planes.
Thank you. Mr. Kimmer, you indicated that a massive scaling up of electrolyzers is needed. I spent my career before coming to Congress developing wind turbine manufacturing. And I understand that every time you double production, you reduce production costs by 10 to 15%. But the other problem with electrolysis is energy efficiency. How do you propose to increase the conversion efficiency?
Thank you for that. And very aware of your background. I'm very glad to have you on the committee. I think you're talking about learning curves, right? You're talking about with a doubling of the deployment of something, you cut the cost dramatically. I think efficiency is something that has been sort of a lot has been made of it, right? I think when you talk about, people talk a lot about kind of wheel to well or well to wheel efficiency in vehicles, right? Where they're saying, hydrogen would be far less effective than, say, electric vehicles. So you see a lot of these examples. There's no doubt that that's true. I guess efficiency matters when a resource is really, really expensive, right? So you don't hear a lot of people talking about the efficiency of taking a drop of oil from, Nigeria and bringing it to your gas station in the form of gasoline, right? The amount of petroleum used to do that is quite high. I think the thing that matters when it comes to efficiency is really what the cost of the input electricity is, right? And so I would rather have less efficient electrolyzers put in the field today at massive scales. Take a look at the first panels that we put in solar, right? Those were, 175 kilowatt panels, right? We're talking about 550 watt panels at this point, right? So I guess where I'm going is to say the cost of solar and wind now is so cheap that the efficiency of these first massive deployments can be quite low if necessary. And the economics will still work, because if you're using twice as much of something that costs nothing, you're better off deploying the low efficiency electrolyzers, pulling that volume down, getting them down the cost curve.
Well, there's a lot that we could discuss there, but I'm out of time, so I yield back.
Mr. Jimenez is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the ranking member. A question: I'm intrigued by fuel cells, and maybe Dr. Diaz de Rubia can answer the question. Fuel cells, the fuel cells themselves. What is the durability of a fuel cell?
Thank you, sir. I'm going to pass on that question. I'm not really an expert on fuel cells, so I think I'll let Mr. Whitkey answer that from NREL.
Okay. Somebody can answer that question? The durability of the cell.
Thank you, Representative Jimenez. So the durability of fuel cells today in applications in light-duty cars, for example, that are introduced in California, almost 10,000 cars out there, those are around 5,000 hour durability. And of course, in a car, you don't use it very much. It sits most of the time parked. So that gets you about 100 to 150,000 miles. What's needed for heavy duty trucks is 4 to 5 times that, getting up to a 1,000,000 mile durability. And so, and efficiency is also much more important in the heavy duty cycles because you're using it more, and the cost of the fuel and the cost of the driver end up being much more important than the capital cost up front. So the 1,000,000 mile fuel cell truck consortium is really driving toward efficiency and high durability, so that the fuel cell trucks can get on the market and use less fuel and be economic to compete head to head with diesel when all the environmental concerns are taken into account.
How does that relate to a battery? And let's say in a car, what's the lifespan of a battery in a car?
So I'm not an expert on batteries, but I believe that they're again targeting that parity with today's gasoline cars, which is 100,000 miles plus. I have a Prius that got 180,000 miles out of my original nickel metal hydride battery. I put a used one in there. I'm at 230,000 miles on it right now, still getting almost 50 miles per gallon. So I think batteries are able to do the job in terms of durability in light duty. I think in heavy duty, it might be a challenge based on the duty cycle and the duration of use.
Okay, that's very interesting. Look, I'm all of the above kind of energy guy. Okay, I also believe in that. Never let perfect be the enemy of good. And some people here are trying to drive to perfection. I disagree with your analysis that somehow electric cars are zero emission. There's nothing that's zero emission because they get the electricity from something that is producing CO2. 25% of all greenhouse gases produced in the United States actually come from electricity production. So I'm also very concerned about our drive toward electric vehicles, not the drive toward electric vehicles, but one kind, which is battery operated. And the reason I'm concerned about that is because the materials needed to build those batteries, actually the raw materials, actually 80% of them are controlled by China. All right. And that concerns me a lot. I am really intrigued by fuel cells though. And somehow I think we need to see if we can be a leader in fuel cell technology for light vehicles and for trucks. They have certain advantages. Number one, they can be refueled very quickly, just like a gas station. You don't have to wait 20, 30, 50 minutes to recharge. And I can imagine when we have a whole bunch of electric vehicles, the lines that we're going to have, people trying to recharge their vehicles, especially when they're on the road on, trying to get to on a long trip, are going to be, I think they're going to be insurmountable, and that's going to be a big problem. And then what are we going to do with these batteries when they do run out? And where are we going to store them? Because apparently, they're not a good thing to store. They got toxic material and all that kind of stuff. So, is there an initiative to better fuel cell technology and somehow incentivize fuel cell technology so we become a leader in the fuel cell technology and cars and trucks driven by that versus the batteries, which we seem to have picked as the winner? And I think that we're going down the wrong path, to be honest with you. Anybody want to answer that?
Got 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Very briefly, the great state of New York, there's a company called Plug Power that makes fuel cells. They do a great job. Those are used right now in forklifts, heavy-duty applications. Heavy-duty applications are the killer apps for fuel cells, long-haul trucking in particular. As a research focus, coatings, seals, corrosion, like use-inspired, deployment-inspired research will really help that.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I guess my time's up. I yield back.
Mr. Norcross is recognized.
Thank you, and to the chairman, appreciate holding the hearing on this. It's fascinating. We've primed the pump. The $8 billion that's going in here to the R&D, I think, is a very good move. My question is, and I've heard from several of you about private capital, supply and demand, and we certainly have had that conversation of how we produce hydrogen. What I am curious about more to do with the standards that we are setting up. If you ask private industry, it's real clear what they do in terms of trying to make a profit. When we're looking at this from the beginning to the end, and that's a relative spot of carbon reduction, what are we going to include in that? We talk about the electricity being generated 100% renewable. Well, we feed off a grid, so it is a mixed bag no matter what we look at. We prime the pump and then we say to the industry, that money's going to follow. How do we determine what standards? Is it simply the cost or is it the carbon reduction? If it's carbon reduction, where do we start and where do we stop in terms of that calculation? And I want to open that up to all the panel.
I'd be happy to start, Mr. Norcross. Critically important question. The DOE has a big role to play here. Pursuant to the infrastructure bill, it needs to come up with the standards in the next few months. The first step is to establish a rigorous boundary for which emissions to take into account. And this at a minimum should include emissions arising at the site of production and upstream, considering those can be very substantial. This boundary should be subject to periodic revisions and potentially expanded as emissions from hydrogen transport, for instance, become clearer, and we should do that. Second step is to establish a limit that is low enough on those emissions to ensure that we're incentivizing the cleanest sources and sources that are the most in line with our long-term goals. Hydrogen generation assets are long-lived, 20, 30, 40 years in some cases. We need to have a long, medium, and long-term view in setting those standards to orient the market in the right direction so as not to be stuck by assets that may be stranded in 10 years because they're highly emitting. So the DOE has a big role to play, and the framework for those calculations and the limit will be absolutely critical to orient the market.
So just to follow up on this, we have the profit motive, which is what makes us a great nation, capital. How do we determine and give certainty to those investors that you say in 5 years we renew what the standards are? Well, that changes a whole calculation for an investment. And at the end of the time that we go into it, it's going to determine whether the money actually follows this. So let me shift to distribution of the hydrogen. And we're talking about pipelines. Has that developments of in changing from a natural gas to hydrogen, are we further down the line that we can go back and forth? Because right now, pipelines, as you mentioned, are a big problem. Well, if we say we're going to switch these over to hydrogen, that changes a perspective. Is it either or both in the use of the pipelines? To the panel.
Sir, if I may, I'd like to relate an experience I had in Germany recently. I traveled to Germany with a delegation to visit companies involved in the hydrogen economy and learn what was going on in the EU and Germany. And there we learned from the largest pipeline company in Germany, OEG, that their plan is to have 80% blends to 100% by 2050 of hydrogen in all their pipeline infrastructure. Their plan is zero natural gas coming out of pipelines by 2050. It all will be hydrogen, and it will be on the existing pipeline infrastructure. They believe, the German engineers believe, that it is possible, absolutely, and they're demonstrating it, to get 80% hydrogen into a natural gas pipeline. Now, the compressors, there are pieces of the pipeline that need to be changed, but they are moving ahead very, very aggressively. In the delegation was one of the largest pipeline companies in the U.S., Williams, the Williams company in Oklahoma. They believe that at this point, they think that only 3% hydrogen can be blended into the natural gas pipelines. And so there's a big disconnect between what is happening in Germany right now or in the EU and what we believe to be possible here in the US. I think there are a lot of open questions when it comes to the performance of the current pipeline infrastructure for hydrogen. Very, very important topic.
Thank you. I'm out of time and I yield back.
Mr. Obernolte is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. This has been a really fascinating hearing. Mr. Whipke, I wanted to ask you a question about some of the costing figures that you were citing when we were talking about the DOE's hydrogen shot program. It's been a kind of a focus of this hearing, the distinction between development and deployment. And, we can look at the experience that we've had deploying electric vehicle technology is kind of, the canary in the coal mine of how difficult it's going to be to get hydrogen technology deployed. It's one thing to develop it, but deploying it requires us to meet a lot of commercial conditions that, aren't present in the laboratory. So, particularly for industries where hydrogen is really our best method of decarbonization, like aviation, maritime shipping, long haul trucking. You mentioned that the hydrogen shot program is geared towards getting the cost of hydrogen down below $1 per kilogram. What would the cost per kilogram have to be cost competitive with fossil fuels in those industries? Because those industries are obviously very cost sensitive, and we're not going to succeed in deployment until we achieve some kind of cost parity. So has that research been done?
Yeah, so today's hydrogen from natural gas is around $1.50 to $2 per kilogram of hydrogen, with no carbon capture or storage. So that was kind of, for a while, that was our bogey for research, was to hit $2 per kilogram of hydrogen. And what we've done with the Hydrogen Shot Initiative is we actually lowered that to be lower than natural gas. It is absolutely challenging and a worthy endeavor to drive toward that. And even if we get to just parity with natural gas-based hydrogen with no capture of the CO2, I think we will be competitive in a lot of industries. And in fact, in heavy-duty trucking, because of the way they operate and the high energy throughput and the need to get toward not only low carbon, but also low local air quality requirements, I think hydrogen will be superior. So we're going to drive toward one. And if we, along the way, pass through different sectors where it becomes competitive, those markets will grab it, especially the price sensitive ones in industry where they make decisions based on economics.
Okay, yeah. So I'm asking a slightly different question, though. I mean, if you take something like maritime shipping as an example, they use those high sulfur heavy fuels for a reason, because it's the cheapest way of getting, a massive ship from point A to point B. At what price point would hydrogen have to be cost competitive with fuels like that?
I mean, whatever the cost is of bunker fuel for a ship, if they need to be cost competitive with that, it would be extremely low. I think one of the big opportunities is countries like Australia and others who have a lot of land and renewables to actually make hydrogen as an export. And that really enables, new applications like marine and exporting hydrogen across the ocean. But I don't think it will necessarily be done just based on economics at that scale. They will be exporting it to countries that really care about carbon and are willing to pay more of a price premium. So I don't think you can just say we need to get to price parity in every market, today, or we don't even start.
No, I understand, but I don't think anyone would argue we have to get to price parity. But if you look at what we've gone through with renewable electricity generation, you can see this tug of that these ideas are in tension, that they're wanting to deploy low carbon technology and wanting to protect consumers from price increases, right? So I'm just wondering, maybe Dr. De La Rubia, maybe you have the answer to this question. I mean, so has anyone done the math about if we get down to $1 per kilogram of hydrogen, how close that is to having price parity with fossil fuels?
Look, I mean, in my view, it's and it has been said before that different markets are going to adopt hydrogen at different rates. I don't have a concrete answer to your question, but I want to use an example again from my trip to Germany back in November. We were talking about green steel a lot, and it has been brought up here. And the real question from the market sector companies was, who is going to adopt green steel? Because it's going to cost a lot more than it does to make steel today. And the answer with green hydrogen coming from Sweden was Mercedes-Benz. And Mercedes-Benz is interested in adopting green steel because they have demand from customers for S-Class vehicles where, you know, if you're paying 120,000 or 140,000, probably doesn't matter that much, okay? And so there is a demand sector, right? But it's very small. So introducing, even if the efficiencies are not 100% or the costs are not parity yet, introducing these technologies now for specific, possibly high-end markets, okay, like an S500 Mercedes-Benz, is where the industry is going, is where the market is going to start adopting hydrogen. So,
yeah, we're out of time here, but I think it's a fascinating topic. But my point is, we ought to know the answer, right? Because industries like maritime shipping and aviation, where hydrogen is the most promising new technology for decarbonization, are very price sensitive. And, you know, we're never going to get wide scale adoption until we get somewhere close to price parity. And so, I was just trying to compare the two. Anyway, but thanks very much. And thanks for the fascinating hearing. I've really enjoyed it. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Caston is recognized.
Thank you. I really appreciate this hearing. One of the things I love about this committee is that you all have the pleasure of testifying before the only committee in Congress that deals with non-negotiable laws, you know, mass conservation, energy conservation. It's a perk of this committee. I mentioned that because I want to start, and I really appreciate Mr. Friedman's comments about how important some of the industrial uses of hydrogen are. And at the same time, I will tell you that I'm really concerned that we don't prioritize our research budgets always in the ways that have the most uses. So, Mr. Wipke, I want to go through just a couple just straight math issues. And I'm hoping we can answer quick because I want to get to sort of a meaty policy question at the end for everybody's input. 20 years ago, the state of the art in energy storage for electricity was lead acid batteries, and the state of the art for hydrogen was compressed hydrogen tanks. Lead acid batteries were, you know, and I'm going back, some of these numbers are old, you know, 40 watt hours per kilogram, maybe 80 watt hours per liter. State of the art for batteries is now lithium ion. That's almost a tenfold improvement, you know, touching up close to 300 watt hours per liter, you know, close to 700 watt hours per liter, close to 300 watt hours per kilogram. So that's a tenfold improvement, which is why we can now talk about vehicles with long ranges. And so as an energy carrier, whether we're going to use electricity or hydrogen as an energy carrier, we've seen these huge advances in the mass and energy density. Over the last 20 years, has there been any meaningful advance in the energy or mass density of hydrogen storage technology, such as we've seen for electricity? And I'm not criticizing the research, I'm just trying to understand, has there been any change in those numbers?
Yeah, so for decades, the goal of the hydrogen storage research was onboard storage for vehicles, for cars specifically. So very tight requirements. Essentially, what was needed for a car has been met. You can store 6 kilograms on board in compressed hydrogen tanks. It does the job. It also does the job for heavy-duty trucks today. However, the research hasn't stopped. And I think, you know,
I'm sorry to cut you off because I do want to get to my question. I'm just asking, like, state of the art was compressed in hydrogen, you know, maybe liquefied 20 years ago. Do we have new technologies that have a greater, I'm not questioning the goals, I'm saying, has the technology changed much in the 20 years as far as our ability to get more watt hours into less mass, less volume?
I think the goalposts aren't necessarily there for onboard storage. We don't need to do it with the cars, right? We've got what we need to.
Well, let me, and again, I'm not just talking about vehicles. I'm saying hydrogen as an energy carrier is tied to that storage question. From an efficiency perspective, I take issue with Mr. Kimber's comment that efficiency doesn't matter. It does matter. If we can, you know, generate solar power with half as much acreage, that's a big deal, even though the sun is free. Well, the 20 years ago, you know, the state of the art for conversion, you know, round trip efficiency on a battery, 70, 80%, round trip efficiency, electrolyzer to storage to a fuel cell, you know, maybe 30% more if we're going to use liquefaction. I don't think either of those numbers have meaningfully changed in 20 years. So we're still at 70 to 80% round trip efficiency on electric, 30%. Mr. Wipke, has there been anything that's really changed in your view of sort of those round trip efficiency numbers?
Yeah, so I think some things have changed and actually relates to storage. So stationary storage of hydrogen, if you're using compressed tanks, you've got to compress it. There's actually metal hydride storage, and we're going to be demonstrating that at NREL at a scale of 525 kilograms of hydrogen, where you store it at a much lower pressure. You can actually remove the compressor from that efficiency chain. So
Okay.
you know,
and I'm sorry to keep cutting you off, but even if the storage was free, you're still looking at a 70-80% electrolyzer efficiency and a 40% fuel cell efficiency. So you're from a cycle perspective, that green hydrogen has an efficiency. No, and I want to get to one last point and then get to my policy question for all of you. This one I think is much less controversial. Mr. Whipke, is there more carbon per mass in a cubic meter of CO2 or a cubic meter of crude oil?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
Oh, anybody want to chime in? It's a simple question. There's a lot more carbon in a cubic meter of crude oil than CO2.
Yes,
I say that because we cannot do EOR. If we're pumping CO2 under the ground to release oil, we're increasing CO2 emissions. So we've got to do green hydrogen. So all of my questions are not to criticize green hydrogen, but my question on all this is that if, as an energy carrier, we're not making big advances in efficiency, we're not making big advantages, but electricity has really surged ahead, then are we doing enough to focus on the industrial uses of hydrogen that Mr. Friedman mentioned? And do we have any sort of theoretically plausible way, game changer for the hydrogen storage, as we've seen for electricity? Because if we don't, then I think we really need to rethink how our research budgets are prioritized. And I realize I'm out of time, but if that was the question I wanted to get to, and you all are the experts, I'd love to know, are we doing enough and are we prioritizing the right areas? Because it feels to me like the energy carrier focus has gotten all the attention, but the real opportunities are in the less sexy fields like making steel, making cement, thermal uses that Dr. Friedman was talking about. And I realize I'm out of time unless the chairman will afford someone the time to respond.
Yes, 15 seconds each if y'all can.
Yeah.
I just want to strongly agree with you, Mr. Gaston.
Yeah, Congressman, I think, my efficiency argument was more around, the fact that solar efficiency is up over 30% since we started deploying it, in my business 10, 15 years ago. It takes deployment to reach those increases in efficiency. You can't do it in a lab. You're not just going to find 5 years from now that we have a 30% increase in efficiency in the lab. You got to put a lot of stuff in the field.
So, Congressman, I would say that your storage question is tied to the distributed generation of hydrogen as well. If we're able to distribute the generation and store locally, okay, there are companies right now in the private sector who are filing patents with new technologies for storing hydrogen underground in cylinders, very efficient, effective methods for storage, demonstrating new materials and coatings to do that safely. And if you couple your storage question, not for transportation, but for other industrial uses with local generation, right? Then I think we can really make a lot of progress.
Last but not least, you should definitely focus on the unsexy stuff. That's where the money is. That's where the work is, 100%. That includes infrastructure refurbishing. That includes storage. That includes industrial use. That includes tugboats and ammonia, like fertilizer production. All that stuff is a great place to put some research money.
Well, thank you all. And that sounds like the line I used to convince my wife to marry me. I yield back.
Ms. Ross is recognized.
Thank you very much. And this has been so interesting. I want to follow up a little bit on some of the things that Congressman Caston and Congressman Norcross have brought up. So I just want to be clear, you're not talking about hydrogen replacing a natural gas peaker plant, for example. You're talking about hydrogen being used in much more localized areas, not necessarily as part of a utilities fleet. Can somebody elaborate on that, or is the goal to have hydrogen replace a peaker plant?
As the person who builds power plants here, Congresswoman, I'd like to speak to that. I've spent my entire career in the power sector, including the gas-fired sector. Power to gas to power is the last place we should put hydrogen, just to be clear. It could potentially be used to fill in a little bit when we get to sort of like that last decarbonization of the grid. It could be used for firming and some of that stuff. I don't think we should be deploying a bunch of new hydrogen-focused turbines. There are a lot of turbines out there already that could run increasingly higher degrees of hydrogen that are practically useless for economic purposes right now going forward. So we should run those into the ground. I think that is really the key. I think what I would say is I totally agree with Congressman Caston that we should focus on those unsexy places, ammonia production and refining. These are, right there. That's a massive decarbonization lever, as well as steel, although that's a little bit harder to do for a number of reasons. I do think, though, that I want to just really highlight this. I've been trying to say this all along, that pipelines matter, and I'll tell you why. I'm not suggesting that we're going to get it to the end user. I don't want to burn hydrogen in my stove. I do want to put it in pipelines up to, call it 10, 20%, because in the near term, I can park a massive wind and solar facility next to a pipeline in Oklahoma, and I can produce a huge amount of hydrogen, right? If it allows us to scale it at first, when it reaches a certain concentration in those pipes, people will begin to build ammonia facilities next to my plant in Oklahoma. People will begin to build hydrogen-only pipelines. But just like the power grid, you got to put it on the grid first, and then people will realize that there's a market for it.
Okay, so, and I see other people want to answer, but I want to get this next question in, and then if people want to respond to both. So then my next question is, really getting the approval to be in that pipeline. And I represented renewable natural gas companies, and they kept getting booted out of the pipeline because of PHMSA and because of all of these other things. And so, I assume you don't have the money to pay for that infrastructure yourself, and you're going to have to work with the natural gas companies. And so, how's that going to, how is that going to work, and how can we help? Because there's lots of people who want to use built infrastructure, and sharing it and providing safety is a tricky business.
And I don't want to dominate this, but if anybody else wants to go, but we're in a lot of conversations with FERC and PHMSA right now. We're out looking for, we're entertaining investments in our company from pipeline companies. The pipeline companies want to be involved. They want to do this. They want to carry hydrogen. It's not like landfill gas where there's a lot of other quality issues with impurities and other things like that. Mm-hmm. Blending of hydrogen is a little bit, from a technical perspective, cleaner to them. They also see it as a much more scalable industry that they can see a real long-term business in, as opposed to landfill gas, which is quite small.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, if the other folks can respond. Thank you.
Just very briefly, if I may, first of all, if you're going to replace a natural gas peaker, if you're going to use hydrogen in that service, you should be using a fuel cell so you don't burn anything. Start with that. That is better all around. I have recommended to this committee and other committees in the past testimony, we need a census of national pipelines, especially in the distribution networks, but also in transportation networks. We don't know the metallurgy, we don't know the pressure ratings, we don't know the throughput, we don't know the materials, we don't know the vintage, and in the case of distribution, we don't know the location. It would be great to have a census of pipelines so we could answer these questions definitively.
Great. And Mr. Chairman, may Ms. Fakery? Yep.
Great, thank you, Ms. Ross. Quickly, I would like to add one more note of caution around this conversation of retrofitting existing pipelines. I know Mr. Gimber's company is doing some great stuff, but there is a risk here that we start putting in a lot of money in existing infrastructure, retrofitting it, extending its lifetime, and ended up not using it or not using it fully. So I do want to make sure that we have a long-term vision for why we would be retrofitting or putting money into a system that we need to start thinking about pruning. So that is the note of caution I hope we always hover over retrofit conversations.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Lamb is recognized.
Hi, thank you very much. I really appreciate you all appearing today. I was wondering if our power plant expert in the last, you were talking about being able to generate hydrogen at a solar and wind farm and get some of it onto the system. Could we kind of pick up there where you left off? Because I think the point that our last witness just made about sort of retrofitting and looking at the entire system as a whole is a good note of caution. But I am familiar with research that shows we could selectively retrofit or improve existing parts of our pipeline infrastructure to begin allowing the blending of hydrogen into the natural gas system. And I was just wondering if that's where you were going with that.
That's exactly where I'm going with it. There are many of these pipeline systems right now. I will tell you the reason we first started talking to them is because most of them are trying to electrify their compression to begin with. So most of them are actually moving to upgrade their compressor systems, and that includes a lot of their balance of pipe, if you will, as well. So they're already putting money into these systems. In addition to that, a lot of these systems could be isolated. So I'm not for a second suggesting you put it into a bunch of pipes that have a lot of local distribution downstream to people's stoves. But there are a lot of pipes that have potentially only an industrial use downstream, or things of that nature. So, and I want to be clear with people that even fractional percentages in some of these pipes is gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. If we put that amount of capacity in the ground in the next 5 years, we are going to be sitting here with electrolyzers at half the price of what they are today. Our cost forecast with folks like Electric Hydrogen, which is run by the last two CTOs of First Solar, one of the most successful solar companies, and ourselves, we own some of the largest solar facilities in the country, show us getting well below $5. So I think that, where there are price points people are talking about right now that I think industry has maybe even a more aggressive view on where those can go.
So am I right then to interpret this to say that the economics already work if we used some of the hydrogen programs in place basically to take care of the pipeline piece of it in a selective way? Is that what you're saying?
They work in certain applications. And so that's where I'm going. Well, first of all, the hydrogen PTC would accelerate things tremendously. So, we absolutely, need to have that. I think in lieu of that, we could find premium buyers. If we could combine premium buyers with the lowest cost to generate. So you go to Oklahoma, you put it in a pipeline, or you put it over the fence into one of the largest ammonia plants in the country. These are the places where we can get to multi-100 megawatt scale in a single application and drive down that cost. You then find the buyer for that ammonia or the green hydrogen that's going in the pipe that has the highest willingness to pay. And we can talk a little bit more about that too, because we really need to borrow from what the DOE has done in renewable energy credits, the environmental attributes in electricity. We need DOE to create a similar renewable energy credit for hydrogen so that it is a tradable attribute, right? That has to happen, because if it's not, when you put it in the pipe or you give it to the ammonia guy, they have to want the green hydrogen. We don't need that. If I could just sell hydrogen to an ammonia plant that doesn't care if it's green, and then sell the greenness of that to another ammonia plant down on the Gulf Coast, or who has a customer that's willing to pay for green ammonia, that's what I need. That's what made green electricity so successful in this country.
Got it. And Dr. Friedman, I wanted to ask, because I know you were connected to Columbia's Center on Energy Policy. That was where the information I'm aware of about the viability of beginning to retrofit and fix a lot of our existing gas pipeline network to make it ready for increasing levels of hydrogen that would occur over time. Are you familiar with that? And do you see that as kind of a viable national project for us to try to, preserve and improve parts of this pipeline network?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is there's a lot of hair on that. Some pipelines can only take 5% hydrogen blending. Some can take 20% hydrogen blending.
And that's why you're saying we need a census basically to know what is what.
Right. It is also the case that leakage is a real risk. You add hydrogen into a pipeline, it has a leakage risk, and that can not only be a safety risk, but also a climate risk. We need to get our hands around that. And in fact, work that we're doing at Columbia with EDF is trying to get a better handle on what those numbers actually look like.
Great. Well, I'm out of time. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And to all the witnesses, thanks again for appearing. Goodbye.
Mr. Tonko is recognized.
No, thank you. And thank you, Chairman Bowman, for holding this important hearing. And thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Very informative. Clean hydrogen can play an important role in our nation's clean energy future. In particular, hydrogen may prove essential to decarbonizing difficult to abate sectors such as heavy-duty transportation and chemical and metals production. To address the important role hydrogen will play in a clean energy economy, Congress has invested billions of dollars for R&D and deployment through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the Biden administration has taken great steps to advance U.S. leadership on clean hydrogen. And it's not just the federal government. My home state of New York has also made a commitment to become a major hub for green hydrogen. Our state has the infrastructure and the expertise to make this a reality. The Capital Region's own Plug Power, which was earlier mentioned, is a global leader in the emerging green hydrogen market, and NYSERDA continues to invest in processes that will enable a safe, equitable green hydrogen economy. So I'm excited to see the enthusiasm for clean hydrogen growing, but our work isn't done. Just from the broad range of topics covered in this hearing, you can see the exciting research going on. We must continue to invest in clean hydrogen R&D to continue reducing costs and making it a widely available option for numerous sectors and uses. So as we make this energy transition, we need to learn from our past mistakes and make certain that the clean energy economy is good for everyone, especially our most vulnerable neighbors. So, Ms. Fakhri, what should we be thinking about in the R&D space to ensure that clean hydrogen production brings benefits to surrounding communities and does not increase pollution?
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. Critically important question. I would start by saying NRDC does not speak for impacted communities, and their perspectives and voices should be heard. I cannot fully answer this question without the perspectives of those impacted communities, and I would thereby strongly recommend that DOE engage in direct outreach to those communities in developing its own hydrogen work further to ensure their perspectives and concerns are reflected. However, for now, to respond to your question, two critically important guiding principles have to hover over this conversation. One is we have to strongly prioritize those projects that have no public health implications. That is critical, and DOE has to make sure those are prioritized. The second piece is that projects have to lower local air pollution, not just keep it as such, has to demonstrate a lowering of local air pollution and be subject to early and proactive engagement with those communities.
Thank you. And the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act created a clean hydrogen manufacturing and recycling program, among other investments in R&D at DOE. So, Mr. Kimber, how can R&D for clean hydrogen production and recycling help support domestic supply chain capabilities?
I'm not entirely sure that I'm qualified, but I'll take a quick stab. I think, the renewable energy industry in general, whether it be batteries or solar or electrolyzers are no different. We build things with equipment that oftentimes has rare metals and other inputs. So I think that R&D of recycling is critically important. I actually think doing it now is very farsighted. It gets ahead of the problem, where I think, in solar, for instance, we got caught a little bit flat-footed and are, playing catch up on what it takes to recycle a lot of the panels, wind turbine blades, things like that. So I think that can be a critical part of not only our environmental responsibility as an industry, but also potentially reusing those elements so that we're less reliant, as one of the members said, on China and other geopolitical rivals for those goods.
Thank you. And Mr. Whipke, what additional innovations can help in reducing the cost of electrolysis and clean hydrogen produced using this technology?
Thank you. We're working on a lot of new materials to support that through the various consortium I mentioned earlier. I think it's also important to look at the scale and manufacturing, and Plug Power has been a great example of putting money into actually getting to large-scale production of things. And that is absolutely critical. I think things like large-scale deployments and demonstrations help that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the private sector investment is 6 to 10 times more than government investment. And that is what really drives things quickly. That's what drove it in solar and wind and batteries. And I think we are very close to being to the point where the investors and the private sector are just going to take this and run, and government role will be on the research and keeping that pipeline feeding toward them with better innovations.
Thank you so much. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Dr. Foster is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Many of the advanced zero carbon power technologies end up producing energy that shows up ultimately as process heat, usually in the range of 600, 900 degrees C. And that's true whether you're a believer in fusion energy or solar thermal or advanced nuclear or even fast reactors or accelerator-driven systems that exploit the huge amount of energy remaining in the spent nuclear fuel that's piling up around the country. In all cases, these ultimately produce high temperature process heat. And so your options for using this process heat are either to first convert it to electricity with turbo machinery and generators and so on, and then use that electricity and electrolyzers to get hydrogen, where maybe you'll be lucky to get to a combined efficiency of maybe 30%, or with direct thermochemical processes, where you might get to 50% efficiency and potentially much lower capital costs. So now we're about to spend several $1 billion on hydrogen hubs, one of which is specified to use nuclear energy. So my question is, what are the merits of having this nuclear hydrogen hub be based on standard technologies, say putting electrolyzers at an existing nuclear plant, or on direct thermochemical production of hydrogen or ammonia or methanol or other hydrogen carriers? And if you could answer this both from the point of view of the likelihood of hitting the $1 per kilogram goal and of learning something new and useful. So I guess, Dr. Friedman, since you mentioned the sulfur iodide cycle, I'll start with you.
Sure, and I look forward to Dr. Diaz de la Rubia's comments. He's also a really deep nuclear expert. The sulfur iodine cycle is still promising. It's still largely unbaked. There just hasn't been enough work yet to really show that it can be done. It really does require high temperatures, more like 850 or 900 degrees Celsius to work. That's a very high temperature novel reactor. We don't have a lot of those out there. So remains promising, remains largely unexplored. That makes it a great focus for something like a pilot or a demonstration. It makes it a poor choice for a hub. The hubs really require industrial production to deliver to customers of all kinds. There's just a little too much technical risk in the sulfur iodine cycle. I would say that we have not thought at all, from a research perspective, we have really not thought at all about how to use waste heat to help electrolyzers. That's a really good thing to do, actually. Many electrolyzers must run at high temperatures. You can use some of that waste heat in a productive way. That sort of heat integration, efficiency gain work, largely undone. Idaho and NREL have done a little bit of good work on this, actually, that I would like to see more of that.
Yeah, it's my understanding that the Japanese do have a pilot plant on sulfur iodide. Yeah, Dr. De La Rubia?
Well, thank you, Congressman. I don't have much to add to what Julio just said. I would only point out that, one would hope that we're able to accelerate the regulatory process on advanced small modular nuclear reactors that operate at high temperatures, as you mentioned. I think we're going to need that industry to grow here in the United States, not only overseas, which is where, unfortunately, we're seeing most of the action right now, even from American companies licensing overseas and planning to commercialize overseas. I would like to see that industry be brought back or ensured that it stays here in the United States, that all this innovation that we created, through the decades stays here, because I think it will be very important to the hydrogen economy as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I thought it was interesting that one of the advanced reactor designs that we are now prototyping has molten salt heat storage in tanks,
right,
which could really affect the economics. And it strikes me there's a possibility to do some R&D simply by using that as a source of process heat. And then when there's surplus generating capacity, be able to divert some of the power to, for example, making hydrogen or related compounds.
No doubt about it, sir. I will also say, as you mentioned, believers in fusion, I am a very, very strong believer in fusion energy. The recent advances that we have seen coming out of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, coming out of the JET tokamak in the United Kingdom, really point the way towards, the fact that we're finally getting to the place where the science is coming through. And I think we also need to think about how fusion energy may play a role in our future energy economy. I think it's the time
And
now.
what are the temperatures of process heat that fusion plants are talked about as producing? They're molten
So,
usually.
yeah, in the case of inertial fusion energy plants using molten salts, the process heat will be about 900 degrees Celsius. Okay. So again, very high temperatures. I believe that's the case with tokamaks as well.
Yeah, I'm just struck at how similar these look like from the balance of plant points of view, and that there's a lot of shared R&D. All right, my time is up. And field back.
Mr. Byers recognized.
Thank you. And thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks so much for having this hearing today. It's really fun to hear that more and more of our top scientists are recognizing that fusion has a real role to play, and not just long after we're dead and buried, that it can happen while we're still here. And but we do need to have every tool in our toolbox to rapidly decarbonize, and green hydrogen plays that role in the hard to decarbonize sectors. I worked with Congressman Larson and Congresswoman Del Bene to introduce the Clean Hydrogen Production and Investment Tax Credit Act. It was included in Build Back Better, and we hope it will be in the final version of Build Back Better that Senator Manchin approves. Ms. Fakhri, the bipartisan infrastructure law has one hub designated for blue hydrogen, and you appropriately note the concerns we might have with hydrogen sourcing, use, and deployment for negative climate impacts if not done properly. How do we best shape the blue hydrogen hub to account for those concerns?
Thank you, Mr. Byer. I would also be curious to hear my fellow witnesses' ideas here. Yes, there will be a hub that will be a blue hydrogen hub. And this is where DOE has an absolute obligation to input and implement a very rigorous and ambitious production standard around the blue hydrogen. And we need a very strong measurement, reporting, and verification system for methane. We still don't have that. This is the optimal opportunity to start implementing more rigorous rules around methane leakage. And when it comes to carbon capture, there needs to be a requirement that only high carbon capture rates would be allowed. We cannot allow a 50% capture. That is not enough. We need to be pushing for 90% and more with stringent requirements to ensure that this is always the operational pattern. It's not a fluctuating between 90 and 50. We need to ensure high levels of capture. And in addition to that, there needs to be a consideration of public health metrics, considering the potential public health that blue hydrogen poses to communities. There needs to be very strong and early engagement with those communities around those projects, and strict public health metrics that DOE has to impose on these projects.
If I could add briefly to that, we should have low upstream emission standards associated with that. Dr. Fakhri had mentioned that briefly, but it can't be said enough. We really want to make sure that's low. To Senator Caston, to Representative Caston's point, it would be great if blue hydrogen projects were not automatically associated with enhanced oil recovery. In Build Back Better, there are amendments to 45Q that would provide $85 a ton incentive for storage in saline aquifers. If the life cycle of the footprint of the hydrogen is considered in its totality upstream and downstream, you'd want to do saline aquifer storage. There are great places to do this all over the United States, from Illinois to the Gulf of Mexico to California. It would be wonderful to see projects adopt that stance.
Thank you. Mr. Kimber, what does it take in your mind to make electrolysis-based hydrogen cost competitive with solar in terms of cost? Germany would argue that we got cost competitive solar because of their big investments. So what do we need for green hydrogen?
We need big investments by government, right? I think that what we've seen right now is we are just on the very cusp of the huge benefits from the investment we've seen in renewables and wind and solar, right? We're seeing massive job creation. There are hundreds of thousands of people in this country working in clean energy, and I think that the hydrogen PTC, to your point, that has been included in Build Back Better, but I think it has broad support, in fact, bipartisan support in many cases. I think is something that has to happen. We have to have pull through of this demand, right? We have to build this stuff for a good 5 or 10 years for us to really begin to see the scalability, the repeatability, and for it to become a standalone industry that can run on its own. So I think we need, all of the stuff we've talked about here that is in the purview of this committee, but also really need to focus on, trying to get the same tax credit support that we've had for other energy technologies, including fossil.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Whipke, I only have 25 seconds, but our labs, how do we maximize them with the new hubs?
Well, I think, we're going toward a national network here, and I think we need to make sure that the national labs are able to be used to support all of the hubs in a way that is most impactful. This is a turning point, a tipping point for hydrogen. We just want to all make sure that this is a big success.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Before we bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank our witnesses for testifying before the committee today. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for any additional questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. The witnesses are excused and